In the mid-1800s, the United States faced a deep division that would change the nation forever. The Civil War, 1861 to 1865, was a battle between the North and South, driven by different beliefs about slavery, states' rights, and economics. This war would ultimately determine the fate of millions of enslaved African Americans and the future of the nation itself. But the conflict didn't end on the battlefield. The aftermath of the war, known as Reconstruction, set the stage for a long struggle to rebuild the South and guarantee equal rights for all citizens. Let's dive into these defining moments in U.S. history. The Civil War was the deadliest conflict in American history, fought between two regions with fundamentally different ways of life. The northern states, or Union, had a more industrialized economy and a growing belief in a strong federal government. The southern states, on the other hand, relied heavily on agriculture, particularly cotton, which depended on enslaved labor. The central issue was whether slavery would be allowed to expand into new territories and states, or if it should be abolished entirely. In 1861, after the election of Abraham Lincoln, a Republican who opposed the spread of slavery, 7 southern states seceded from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America. 4 more states joined them after the war began. The Union, led by President Lincoln, opposed the spread of slavery and sought to preserve the United States as one nation. This division ultimately led to the start of the Civil War. The first battle of the war took place at Fort Sumter in South Carolina on April 12, 1861. Confederate forces fired on the Union garrison, marking the beginning of open hostilities. Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteer soldiers to put down the rebellion, and this led to the secession of even more southern states. In the early years, the war was a back-and-forth struggle, with the Union's superior resources and manpower eventually wearing down the Confederacy. Major battles like the Battle of Bull Run, 1861, and the Battle of Antietam, 1862, which became the bloodiest single-day battle in American history, highlighted the brutal nature of the conflict. However, the Union suffered setbacks, and the war seemed far from over. One of the turning points came with the Battle of Gettysburg, 1863, a 3-day battle fought from July 1st, 3 in Pennsylvania. The Union, led by General George Meade, repelled General Robert E. Lee's Confederate Army, marking a decisive defeat for the South. It was the largest battle of the war, with over 50,000 casualties. The Union's victory at Gettysburg, along with the fall of Vicksburg on July 4th, 1863, gave the Union a much-needed strategic advantage. After the Emancipation Proclamation, African Americans were allowed to join the Union Army. By the end of the war, nearly 180,000 African American soldiers had served, contributing greatly to the Union's victory. One famous unit was the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, which fought valiantly in battles like the Second Battle of Fort Wagner. The war saw several critical campaigns, including General William Tecumseh Sherman's infamous March to the Sea, 1864, in which he led Union forces from Atlanta to Savannah, Georgia, destroying Confederate resources and infrastructure in a brutal strategy known as total war. Sherman's tactics devastated the South, signaling that the Confederacy was on the brink of collapse. By 1865, with his army exhausted and outmanned, General Robert E. Lee was forced to surrender to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9, 1865. This marked the official end of the Civil War, though fighting continued in some areas until later in the month. The Confederate defeat came at a heavy cost. Over 600,000 Americans died, making the Civil War the deadliest conflict in U.S. history. One of the most significant moments in the Civil War came on January 1, 1863, with the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. This executive order declared all enslaved people in Confederate-controlled territories to be free. While it did not immediately end slavery in the border states or in Union-controlled territories, it was a crucial step toward abolition. The Emancipation Proclamation had multiple goals. First, it aimed to weaken the Confederate economy, which was heavily reliant on enslaved labor. By freeing slaves in the South, the Union hoped to strike at the heart of the Confederate war effort. Second, it helped to shift the focus of the war from merely preserving the Union to also securing the freedom of millions of African Americans. While the proclamation did not immediately free all enslaved people, it had profound symbolic and practical effects. It encouraged enslaved people in the South to escape to Union lines, and thousands joined the Union Army. It also changed the character of the war, making the abolition of slavery a central goal of Union policy. In addition to its military and moral importance, the proclamation allowed for the recruitment of African American soldiers into the Union Army. By the end of the war, nearly 200,000 African American soldiers had served in various roles, fighting for their freedom and the future of the nation. The Emancipation Proclamation laid the foundation for the eventual passage of the 13th Amendment, which fully abolished slavery in the United States in 1865. The Civil War may have ended in 1865, but the struggle for equality and the Reconstruction of the South were just beginning. Reconstruction was the period from 1865 to 1877 when the U.S. government worked to reintegrate the Southern states back into the Union and address the legal and social status of the formerly enslaved population. It was a time of political, social, and economic upheaval. During Reconstruction, Congress passed the 13th Amendment in 1865, which officially abolished slavery in the United States. This was a monumental achievement, but it was only the beginning. The 14th Amendment, 1868, granted citizenship to anyone born in the U.S., including formerly enslaved people, and guaranteed equal protection under the law. The 15th Amendment, 1870, aimed to protect the voting rights of African American men, giving them the right to vote and run for office. Under President Andrew Johnson, who succeeded Lincoln after his assassination, the South was initially allowed to rejoin the Union with little change. However, radical Republicans in Congress pushed for more stringent measures to ensure civil rights for African Americans and transform Southern society. They imposed military rule in the South, divided the region into districts governed by Union generals, and ensured the passage of the Reconstruction Amendments. The establishment of the Freedmen's Bureau helped former slaves transition to freedom by providing food, housing, medical care, and education. However, resistance in the South was fierce. White Southerners opposed Reconstruction and sought to restore their pre-war power. Black codes and later Jim Crow laws were enacted to restrict the rights of African Americans, and groups like the Ku Klux Klan used terror and violence to intimidate freed slaves and suppress their rights. Despite these challenges, Reconstruction saw significant African American participation in government. Hundreds of African Americans were elected to local, state, and national offices, including U.S. senators and representatives. Reconstruction effectively ended in 1877 with the Compromise of 1877, which resolved the contested presidential election of 1876. In exchange for resolving the election in favor of Rutherford B. Hayes, the federal government agreed to withdraw the remaining Union troops from the South, which allowed white Southerners to regain control of the region. This marked the end of Reconstruction and the beginning of the era of segregation. The legacy of the Civil War and Reconstruction is still felt today. The war ended slavery and the Reconstruction Amendments promised freedom and equality, but the fight for civil rights was far from over. Reconstruction was a time of great change, but also deep resistance, and its effects shaped the nation for generations. The challenges of uniting a divided nation and ensuring liberty and justice for all continue to be a defining part of America's story, with struggles that continue to echo through history.